Jen Harrison, welcome to 2020 Revision.
Thanks, Ralph. I'm really happy to be here.
Now, you're a youth worker in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. We've obviously had a Victoria in Australia that has suffered during this COVID period, but I want to get a unique take on what's been happening in the world. So I thought I'd head to you over there in Canada. Can you take us through your 2020?
That's a bit of a lofty question, Ralph. Take you through my 2020. Well, it's been in a lot of ways, it's been a really long year. When I look back at how much has happened, and sometimes I wake up and I'm like, I can't believe that it's almost December, and it's at this point feels like it's gone by in a flash. Because the number of changes that have occurred in such a short period of time is astronomical. And I think you're seeing the same thing in Australia. And I don't know whether or not you call people that work with young people youth workers in Australia, but the reason that we call ourselves youth workers here is because we're not teachers, we're not certified counselors. We do other kinds of youth work. So we meet young people at rec centers, or we're doing outreach to meet them if they're street entrenched, or we try to support them if they're struggling with substance use or mental health concerns. And sometimes we work in schools, but we fill lots of gaps, and there's a lot of us. And I work in a health center called Foundry, which is an organization in British Columbia that is like wraparound healthcare for youth. And I also work with families, so I often work with their parents or caregivers. And it's been a wild year. I mean, so much has happened with COVID. It's been so incredibly disruptive. Schools have opened, and a lot of people didn't believe that we were ready for it, but it's happening, and everybody has just had to adjust. We're now, I think, fully into our second wave, and our numbers continue to increase. So, I mean, it's been really difficult on families, and especially difficult on young people who are historically underserved and marginalized. And we have a large street population here in Victoria. And it's been a real mess trying to figure out how to ensure that we're meeting their needs. So it also means that there's a lot of people stepping up to help, but it's very, very complex. Yeah.
So how did things change when the onset of COVID happened earlier this year or late last year, in terms of the role that you were able to perform in the community, and what sort of restrictions were placed on what you're able to do on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I actually work with a group of young people who are, they're on what's called the Youth Action Committee. So they do all these different projects to help inform our healthcare systems, but they also do like social justice projects. And I help them do that. I help guide them as they do it. And we stopped being able to meet. And part of that group meeting was the camaraderie and the community that was developed because they were able to meet and chat with one another and plan things. But often it was just the togetherness and the safety that was created amongst those young people, and we couldn't meet in person anymore. And slowly what happened, we did adjust by going on to Zoom, but slowly what happened is that we lost a lot of young people. They just didn't want to be a part of the group anymore because the whole idea of not meeting in person didn't work for them, and being on Zoom was so weird. It was such a huge adjustment. And I couldn't really meet with families anymore to support them, to help them navigate healthcare in person. So a lot of things went, again, on Zoom or on the phone. And I found that families were a little more, like parents were a little bit more okay with that. But with young people, we have not raised a generation that is comfortable on the phone. And, or like really, I don't want to speak on behalf like of all the kids that I've worked with, the young people I've worked with, but Zoom is also not great. Even though they have screens in front of their faces all the time, sitting and having a conversation like this is weird. And it's a lot of pressure. Um, I don't like it either. And it's very impersonal. So it's a whole other level of adjustment and different way to communicate that has been very bumpy in lots of ways. So I think that that was a huge shift. And I mean, when it comes to the most vulnerable people that I'm working with, I have a number of families that I work with that support kids that have severe mental health and substance use concerns. And when I ask them how COVID has affected them and if they feel that it's added an extra layer of anxiousness or stress to their lives, they say it doesn't, because for them, their lives supporting their kids are often difficult every day. So, I mean, it's all over the map. It's definitely affected everybody, but based on where people are and how much stress they're already carrying, it has a different effect on them.
So is that for you proved or reinforced the value of human connection, particularly with the people that you work with?
Oh, it's just for me, it's one of the most important things that we can do is find ways to connect with people. We know that we all do better when we have solid, trusted, consistent supports in our lives. And that goes for all of us. And whether it's one person or it's 10, we need those people in our lives. And when those relationships get shaken up, or you can't connect with people in the way that you did before, it's just another level of stress and disruption and adjustment. And if you're already a vulnerable person because you're struggling with mental health or substance use, it's just worse. And I don't know how much you know about the opioid poisoning crisis in Canada right now, but we're seeing like 3 times as many deaths to opioid poisoning than we are to COVID right now in British Columbia. So
Extraordinary.
people are isolated, and also, you know, strangely, we get a lot of the drugs that come into British Columbia come in through, like, they're shipped in, and because our borders have been closed to most folks, like, people are getting dirty drugs, local dirty drugs, and they're dying because of it. So it's a weird inadvertent effect of COVID. And so now we're working on safe supply and trying to make sure people have what they need in a harm reduction model. But the layers of complication are great.
So what have been the main learnings from that kind of thing throughout the year, and what are the things that perhaps that are being looked at as potential solutions?
Well, I should say first and foremost, as a youth worker, I often don't feel like I have very much power. And so I work mostly with the individual and with the families. And so the optimistic things that I see happening and the possibilities for like survival through this and thriving through this are within the individuals that I meet. And they are very resilient and adaptable and creative, and they do innately understand like that the power of connection. And so people are doing what they can to make sure they can get through this and also help one another. And I think that's one of the big learnings too, is that when we ask for help, a lot of people have shown up. There's a lot of different like, you know, Facebook groups and different forums where we've been asking for different things, like, you know, tents for people to sleep in or warm socks because we're coming into really cold, wet weather. And people just show up and help out. There's been cafes that have been opened specifically to make food for free. Like, it's incredible the generosity and the love that has shown up to address this. However, At the same time, my skeptical side is like, where were you before? Why did it have to get to this place? And so I think one of the big learnings is that you can't avoid the needs of folks anymore, because they are very clear. They're right up in front of our faces, and to ignore it is like a very overt no into someone's face. Whereas before you could hide a bit, and now, like, all the folks that are street entrenched or struggling to find housing, I mean, they're on the streets, and we're trying to keep them safe, and we can't ignore those issues anymore. But I'm still seeing there is so much reluctance to really work with these folks in a holistic way. So it's not just throwing money at safe supply so they have clean drugs to use. It's not just getting them into a house or an apartment. It's like, do they have supports in place? What is their mental health like? Are they able to afford food? What is their monthly income going to look like? And is it going to sustain them long term? It's complicated. There's no quick fixes to anything, but there's a willingness to look at it. And I think people are doing that. Yeah, just a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and it sounds, and from our perspective here in Australia, I mean, a lot of the, I guess, the good things have been highlighted in the media, and I know that negativity is normally something that is associated with media, but a lot of the reports coming out here are that people have benefited from this period because they've spent more time with their family and kids because they've been forced to work from home. But the thing that hasn't been highlighted as much, and it's someone that works on the front line, is that the people that are lonely or the people that are disadvantaged in the community are probably going to be worse off in this situation, or in the anecdotal evidence that you've sort of supplied, that is definitely the case.
Yeah, I think like the idea of, or the awareness around privilege has come to the surface. There are definitely people, I am like me, I'm quite privileged because my job hasn't stopped because of COVID. So I've been able to continue work. I have a very flexible and adaptable employer. And that is not the case for a lot of people. And if they were already struggling to work, or make ends meet, it's even worse. And I mean, I think for some folks too, being able to stay at home with their kids has been great. But for others, if they can't get out of the house to work, then it's just another layer of stress. So it's really individual. And not everyone is benefiting from being able to work from home. And not everybody wants to work from home. But I know a lot of people, especially, like, we have a really high volume of retail workers, and people that are working in restaurants and cleaners, and like these people have been affected in a really substantial way, because their jobs either stopped or they've been greatly reduced. And then one of the biggest issues in Victoria here is housing. And so some people aren't able to pay their rent. And there's been some help from government. However, it's still precarious. We don't know when that's going to end. And it's not entirely clear that if you've got a rent reduction, are you going to have to pay that afterward? So there's been a lot of really good talk around like a guaranteed minimum income. And for folks, and I hope that we're moving in that direction. I hope we're moving towards legalizing different drugs so that people don't have to be charged when they're using drugs, because it just adds to whatever they're struggling with. But yeah, there's, again, it's just layers and layers. It's not the same story for everybody. And I just happen to work with this with a population that is struggling and that is historically underserved and inadequately served.
So what has been the response from the government? You touched on that there, and what kind of, have you seen decent leadership from your country's prime minister? I mean, that's one of the things that's sort of been looked at here in the, and of course in New Zealand, that when it first struck, people were sort of taken aback as to the shutdown or the lockdown sort of stance, but then quickly came around to the realization that the government was doing a pretty good job. I mean, there's states here that battle between each other in terms of governance, but overall the reception has been reasonably positive. And you know, wartime prime ministers are often seen as popular ones because they're handing out truckloads of money to keep people going. But what's the vibe been around the leadership in Canada?
Oh, it depends on who you are and what your income is and how you're benefiting. I mean, we don't act our best when we're desperate and anxious. And I think that no matter what, I like to believe that our provincial leader, at least our provincial leaders, are doing their very, very best in a very difficult and suffocating situation. I know there's a lot of people who would disagree with me on that. There's definitely some things that I wish were happening differently and addressed a bit differently, but I'm also not in that seat and I don't know what it's like to be in that pressure cooker. There have been like a lot of subsidies for different businesses and for individuals who are struggling, who have lower income. So that's been really helpful. Our provincial health officer, Bonnie Henry, has become a bit of a hero because of the way that she has advised us step by step. She's been very gentle and calm. She's been clearly directive. And so people really dig her. But now in this second wave, which she predicted, which was very clear to us, our numbers continue to go up exponentially. And so we are now asking her, or she is being asked very clearly for more clear direction. And we just, as of last Thursday, were asked again to be more in lockdown mode, not full lockdown, but you know, only spending time with close family, like ensure you're only walking with one person if you have to go on a social walk, like masks everywhere, that kind of thing. So I think what we're asking for though now is just full disclosure, what's happening, and very, very clear, strong direction, because we know that if the numbers keep going up, the trend is that will continue. And to stop that takes a collective agreement, a collective effort. On a countrywide, nation level, it's just different everywhere. It depends on the province that you're living in. But our federal leader is trying to throw money in the direction of, like you said, but there's just it's always a contentious issue in Canada. Politics no one's ever completely satisfied. And I mean, we here in British Columbia, like before all this happened, there was a lot of pressure on government to acknowledge the land of Indigenous people and to ensure that we were actually returning land to Indigenous people. So it was a lot about land sovereignty. Like there was, and in that case, the nation did not look to be doing well, and our province did not look to be doing well. And so there was already a lot of heat and pressure to act before COVID even started. So I would not say that it's one way or the other. There's just a lot of heat right now.
Despite the forecast of what's to come in the next couple of weeks and indeed months with the winter, excuse me, with the winter onset, what are you looking forward to on the positive side for 2021?
Well, What am I looking forward to? I would really love to see better serve, like from a vocational point of view, from a values based point of view. I would just love to see people served well and getting the services that they need. I'd love to see safe supply, more safe supply. I'd love to see like um, legalization of substances here. I would love to see that. I'd love to see a guaranteed minimum income. I would just love to see the movement towards equity. I look forward to equity. And on a personal level, um, I really wanted to fly to Australia this year and visit friends of mine. And I hope that one day that again becomes possible. And I have a friend in India, and I would love to fly there as well one day and spend time with him. But I mean, right now the priority is not spending money on flights and things like that. It's and I don't need those things. Those are luxuries, huge luxuries. Um, and not great for the environment. So maybe it's okay for me to be here and have this space to be a bit more quiet and introspective and yeah, like ground myself so that in 2021 I can be ready for all of these wonderful new initiatives that our government will be introducing to shift how people are supported in this process.
Jen Harrison, thanks for joining me on 2020 Revision.
Thank you, Ralph.